The nations. 2. The word opulence comes to mind. If you were ever asked for an example of it, this room would be the perfect answer. A soft, deep crimson carpet covered the entire floor, so plush it felt as though you might sink in up to your ankles. The room was filled with countless exquisite furnishings, each one a testament to luxury. Amidst it all was a two-seater chaise lounge, its high-quality natural wood frame intricately detailed with French Rococo carvings. The seat, upholstered in black, genuine leather, shone with the material's characteristic luster. A single man was sprawled on this lounge, his long, slender legs casually thrown out as he leaned back deeply into its cushions. Handsome beyond compare. No other words could better describe him. His features were flawless. His silver hair reflected the surrounding magical lights, seeming to shimmer with the brilliance of the stars. A fierce, intense color burned within his sharp violet eyes. And more than his appearance, there was the aura he exuded, that of one born to stand as an absolute superior. He was Jirkniv Rune Farlord El Nix. At only 22, he was the reigning emperor of the Baharath Empire. Feared by the nobles and respected by his subjects, he was lauded as the greatest emperor in history. Besides the young emperor, 4 other men were in the room, but none of them were seated. They stood motionless, as still as statues, in a posture of perfect rigidity. It was the most appropriate stance for a subordinate in the presence of the supreme ruler. They were his attendants. Their lean, supple bodies, like tempered steel, were wrapped in clothing that was luxurious but not gaudy. They looked young, perhaps in their early 20s. How many years had they dedicated to their training? Their hands were as hard as rock, and the hilts of the swords at their waists seemed worn down to the shape of their grips. Jirkniv finally looked up from the parchment he had been studying, his gaze fixing on a point in mid-air, as if a blackboard had appeared there on which he began to write his thoughts. "And the village girl?" "Yes, sir." One of the attendants spoke, his posture unwavering. His voice was quiet but resonant. "She is said to have left just like that." Jirkniv let out a single snort. It was a sound that could be taken as either derision or intrigued interest. He picked up the parchment that the woman had brought, the one that had been tossed carelessly on the lounge, and after glancing through it once more, he threw it aside again. His gaze returned to that fixed point in the air. A heavy silence followed. Unable to bear it any longer, the attendant who had spoken before ventured to ask, "Shall we find and capture her?" "Don't bother." Jirkniv cut him off with a single word, his eyes never wavering from their spot in the air. He raised a clenched fist to his mouth, concealing his lips. His violet eyes glinted with a mix of emotions, and the corners of his mouth slowly curled into a smile. How amusing. What conclusion had Jirkniv reached? A quiet chuckle, a soft cut, escaped his lips. The attendants showed no reaction. They knew that when the emperor organized his thoughts, he would visualize a slate in the air, write countless ideas upon it, and then make his choice. As his closest aides, they knew this, and they also knew how much he loathed to be disturbed. It was then the door opened without so much of a knock. At this outrageous breach of etiquette, the attendants simultaneously lowered their stances slightly, turning hostile eyes toward the door. But upon seeing who had entered, they relaxed their guard just as quickly. The newcomer was an old man with a white beard that reached halfway down his chest. His hair, too, was as white as snow, though it was by no means thinning. The years he had lived were etched as wrinkles upon his face, and a visible spark of wisdom shone in his eyes. Around his neck hung a necklace made of countless small crystal spheres, and several rugged rings adorned his withered fingers. The pure white robe he wore was loose and flowing, made of an exceptionally soft fabric. As the old man entered, a faint herbal scent drifted through the room. This is quite a predicament. The old man, having slowly entered the room, spoke these words as his opening line, his voice possessing a youthfulness that belied his appearance. Jerkniv's intrigued gaze shizdred, his eyes moving without turning his head. "What is it, old man?" "My investigation concluded that several of my unworthy disciples suffered a psychic shock. They will have trouble using magic for some time." "And what does that mean?" "My magic teachings." "Your Majesty, magic is also a part of the world's truth. To master knowledge—" I get it. Jerkniv waved a hand dismissively. "Your lectures are long, just get straight to the point." My guess is, we are dealing with a magic caster equal to myself, or perhaps even greater." A palpable tension filled the room, affecting everyone but the Emperor and the old man. To think that there was someone who could rival the great sage, Fluter Paradine, the highest-ranking magic caster in the history of the Empire, the head imperial wizard, was hard to believe. "I see. You seem pleased, old man." "Of course. I have not met a magic caster of equal or greater power in over 200 years. "You met one 200 years ago?" The Emperor's words were tinged with curiosity. The head imperial wizard recalled a time long past. "Indeed. One of the 13 heroes from the fairy tales, the necromancer, Rigrit Burz Karau. She was the only one. Well, I imagine the other magic casters among the 13 heroes were also exceptional. That said, the remaining ones were a dark heretic, a magic swordsman, a high priest, and a holy magician. And what about now?" Fluter's eyes wandered, as if gazing into the distance. "It is unclear. I feel it would be an even match, but, contrary to the words he spoke while slowly stroking his long beard, the emotion they carried was one of unshakable confidence." Jerkniv, noticing this, gave a broad grin. He picked one of the several scrolls lying on the lounge and tossed it at his own feet. "Read it." One of the attendants stepped forward and picked it up. "This is information from the kingdom." As the attendant read on, his expression grew grim. Jerkniv pulled the contents from the blackboard image he had drawn in the air. It seems the kingdom's warrior captain dueled a servant of this magic caster." The words that followed sent a wave of shock through the other attendants. And he was allowed to win. The air stirred. The kingdom's warrior captain, Gazef Stranov, was one of the most well-known figures from the kingdom in the empire. In terms of swordsmanship, there were only a handful in the empire who could fight him on equal terms. There was no one who could guarantee a victory. To think he was allowed to win a fight. The sheer astonishment at what kind of being could command such a powerful servant was plain on every man's face, no matter how they tried to suppress it. And the servant was an undead. For the first time, a sound of genuine interest escaped Fluter. Controlling the dead was a skill only high-level practitioners could manage. This confirmed what he had suspected during his magical investigation. The opponent was indeed a magic caster who might surpass him. Not one of the attendants failed to recall the earlier exchange between Jerkniv and Fluter. Well now, one of the 13 heroes from the tales, the necromancer Rigrit Burz Karau, was said to control the dead. Did she command an undead capable of holding down a man like Gazef, old man? Let me see. The stories say she created and controlled beings of a very high level. But the truth of that is uncertain. When I met her, she did not have such high-level undead with her. Then can you control such a powerful undead? The difficulty of controlling magically created or summoned beings, like undead or demons, changes based on their power, the size of their magical capacity. If we're talking about controlling a single undead on par with the renowned Gazef, that would be easy. As he spoke, stroking his beard, the surrounding attendants let out a collective murmur of admiration, as if to say, as expected. Would a second one be difficult? It should be considered difficult. If one were to incorporate some kind of magical measure, it might be possible to control multiple. the difficulty skyrockets after the first. That lady, Rigret, was exceptionally skilled at that. Controlling over 20 ghouls at once, for example, is a feat impossible even for a first-rate magic caster. She must have developed some special method, Fluter continued. It was not uncommon in the world of magic casters to keep one's own magical theories and spell formulas secret or to pass them down to a single heir. Fluter himself believed that if he could just obtain the magical theory Rigret had developed, he could control just as many undead. It pained him to admit, but right now, 10 goals was his limit. So, you're saying even you can't do it right now? Ains Ualgaun, surely we're not about to discover he's one of the 13 heroes. No one had an answer to that. Only Fluter's brow twitched slightly. Ha ha ha, this is truly fascinating. I assume you've confirmed the location of this Nazarak. Yes, sir. An attendant took a step forward. We have already investigated it. What kind of place is it? It is called the Great Tomb of Nazarak. It occupies a 300-meter square plot in the middle of a grassy plain surrounded by a 4-meter wall. The wall appears to be extremely hard. From what we could see through the lattice gate, the atmosphere is that of a graveyard. We are currently investigating when it was built, but we have yet to receive a report from the Central Intelligence Ministry.
Jerkniv jutted his chin as if to say, continue, and another attendant stepped forward. We are preparing to dispatch an investigative team composed of several knights. Stop. Do not take any actions that might be perceived as hostile. My apologies. Old man, can you gather information with magic without the enemy noticing, assuming they are a superior being? It would be impossible. I see. Overwhelmed by Fluter's definitive statement, a brief silence fell before Jerkniv spoke again. We have adventurers, do we not? Yes, there should be some in the imperial capital, but... The attendant replied, confused. Have the best adventurers investigate this great tomb of Nazarak, and of course, do not let them realize the Empire is the client. If it's information we don't even know, this magic caster, Ains Ualgaun, won't be able to extract it from them easily. Understood. At the same time, light a fire under the Central Intelligence Ministry. Old man, I know I'm asking the impossible, but I need you to provide as much magical support as you can. Some will die. And Fluter bowed to the Emperor's unfazed expression. As you wish. Now, things are about to get busy. Jerkniv clapped his hands once, a broad grin spreading across his face. This will be a greater challenge than swallowing the kingdom whole. The slain theocracy worshipped the 6 great gods. This form of religion was quite different from that of the neighboring countries. Generally, the religion practiced in the surrounding nations was a faith in 4 great gods. This belief held that the gods who governed earth, water, fire, and wind created and ruled the world, with lesser gods subordinate to them. The slain theocracy, in contrast, worshipped 2 additional superior gods above these 4, light, representing life, and darkness, representing death. The doctrine was that first there was light and dark, and from them the 4 great gods were born. For this reason, their theology was extremely hostile to the faith of the 4 great gods, which neglected the gods of life and death, and instead worshipped inferior deities as supreme. Religious differences are a source of conflict in any world, but the theocracy's relationship with its neighbors was not bad. Aside from covert conflicts, there had been no open warfare for decades. The reason for this could be summed up in a single phrase: an overwhelming difference in fundamental national power. The theocracy's strength was far superior to that of the surrounding nations. Moreover, the fact that its upper echelons were more or less united by a single ideology was a significant advantage. As for why they didn't invade their neighbors, their religious differences meant they were effectively surrounded by potential enemies. This was another reason for the theocracy's solidarity. Furthermore, the theocracy did not recognize non-human races. This was a deep-seated belief rooted in their religion.
As a result, they frequently clashed with the neighboring Elven Kingdom, the demi-human tribal federations, and the Dwarven Kingdom, all of which were composed of non-human species. For these reasons, the theocracy generally avoided direct conflict with human-led nations, though they were likely the next target after the demi-humans were dealt with, and instead focused on covert operations. Within the theocracy, there was a room of a particular size, not so small but not quite large either. It was solidly built to prevent any sound from leaking out, yet it managed to vent the stuffy indoor heat from somewhere. It was a room of very sophisticated design, testament to the high rank of those permitted to use it. Several men were gathered there. 3 wore priestly vestments of white with gold patterns, 2 wore vestments of black with silver patterns, and 2 men clad in crimson vestments had swords that radiated magical power at their waist. The vestments they all wore were simple, but by no means poorly made. Rather, their simplicity allowed for a more delicate and refined craftsmanship. The ones in white were from the sect that devoutly worshipped the god of life, Ara Araf. In contrast, those in black followed the god of death, Surshana. The last ones in crimson held positions in the theocracy's high temple guard, equivalent to royal guards or legion commanders in other nations. In the center of the room was a table, and on it lay a single large piece of parchment bearing a picture known to everyone living in the theocracy. The god of death, Surshana, the god who grants eternal rest and everlasting despair to all living things. The scriptures state that he is more powerful than the god of life and the other 4 gods, because no one can escape the grip of death. As long as life exists, he is a god that must exist. This god, who rules over fear, death, and disease, would normally be classified as an evil deity. Indeed, his subordinate lesser gods are almost all said to possess malevolent powers. Curiously, however, none of them have ever descended to the mortal plane to become demon gods spreading evil. If anything, it is the lesser gods subordinate to the other deities who tend to become demon gods. The people of this country worship this seemingly evil god in the hope that by praising him, he will refrain from unleashing his wicked power upon them. And the image of this god was the problem at hand, the reason so many had gathered in this room. So you're saying it looked exactly like this? Yes, but only one person saw it, correct? The number is not the issue. Who it was that saw it is the problem. That's absolutely true, but the men in priestly robes exchanged various opinions. Because they shared a common faith, the discussion proceeded smoothly. They were unified in seeking the benefit of the whole rather than their individual interests. Above all, everyone recognized that the matter at hand was far too serious for personal gain to be a consideration. After some time, a resolution was reached, and a sense of calm returned to the heated meeting. There is no need to panic. It's possible someone used the guise of our god to throw us into confusion. A high possibility. Disgusting creatures. So, we agreed to focus on gathering information for now? Yes, that's fine. Heads nodded in unison around the room. Also, sending more agents into the vicinity of the fortress city. A foolish move. We should not risk leaving any more trails. Then let's send the order for a full withdrawal. But the Empire is likely already aware of our movements, aren't they? In that case, wouldn't it be a good idea to stir up some trouble? The kingdom is only aware of a fraction of it. No, if we act recklessly, it could hinder our intelligence gathering around the fortress city. The conflict between the Empire's intelligence agency and our own is already escalating in the royal capital. It would be rude to place any more burden on our information bureau. Shall we request assistance from the priestesses of the astrology bureau or the oracle bureau? Not a bad idea, but then it ceases to be our problem alone. We would have to go through the proper channels. Then we first need to submit a provisional resolution on this operation to our superiors. In that case, I will. They began to iron out the finer details once more. On the table lay the solitary picture of Surshana. The embodiment of death was depicted as a skeleton with scraps of skin clinging to it. Its jet black robe was so vast it seemed to merge with the darkness. and it held a staff that shone with brilliant light. This was the form of the mightiest god, known to all in the theocracy. 50 days would pass from the time Ainz left the village until the nations began to make their move. Let us turn back the clock and tell the story of what happened in the meantime. The man walked down the main street, which had been turned to muck by a recent rain. In this town, with its near absence of cobblestones, rain turned the roads into a muddy mess, creating large puddles everywhere. The man silently made his way down the thoroughfare, avoiding the puddles. When he jumped over one, the grimy leather bag on his back bounced heavily, letting out a metallic clank. After passing several shops, the man stopped in front of a particularly large building. He climbed the few steps leading to the entrance and pushed open the wooden door. There are slow times at the guild reception desk, and it's usually during those times that trouble brews, though that's never actually happened to me before. Muttering that last part to herself, the guild receptionist, Ishbin Romblo, stifled a yawn and let her gaze drift idly into the air from her seat at the counter. She was bored. No new requests were coming in. No adventurers were coming in. She'd finished organizing the request forms 2 hours ago. Leaving her post was the same as abandoning her job, so that was out of the question. She'd even gone to the restroom just 30 minutes ago.
To pass the time, Ishbin picked up a parchment on the counter and began to read its contents. It was the 6th time she'd read it. She had most of it memorized. She considered grabbing one of the books from the shelves behind her, the Adventurer's Records, to kill time, or maybe finding something else to do. Just as her boredom was about to peak, the door creaked and slowly swung open. Ishbin squinted, her eyes adjusting to the difference in light between the outside and inside. A man, silhouetted against the bright doorway, stepped into the guild. He slowly pulled back the hood he was wearing and set down the dirty leather bag he carried on his back. It was unclear what was inside, but the bag was stuffed to bursting. When he set it down, the sound of metal reached Ishbin. 20 points, she thought to herself. He was about 60 points short of being boyfriend material, on a 100-point scale, that is. The man standing there was plain, to put it generously. Of medium height and build, his looks ranged from homely to unattractive. Black hair, black eyes. He seemed to be in his early 20s. His clothes weren't well made, the kind of simple cotton garments a villager might wear. They were a far cry from the gear made for combat that adventurers wore. His leather boots were caked in mud, a reminder of yesterday's rain. A job request or a wannabe adventurer? But as Ishbin observed him silently, her eyes widened slightly. Peeking out from the collar of the man's shirt was the glint of silver, and every time he moved, there was the faint sound of interlocking rings, the telltale sign of chainmail. And the sword at his hip, a broadsword, was a very fine piece. It might even be enchanted. In that case, he might be here on business. Welcome to the Adventurers Guild. When their eyes met, Ishbin put on her professional smile and recited her usual greeting. The man, seeming to have noticed her, approached and stood before her counter. He doesn't have that typical countryside smell of animals or fertilizer. Surprisingly clean, plus 5 points, Ishbin thought as she looked him over. His overall physique wasn't impressive. He didn't seem to have the build of a swordsman. I've come to become an adventurer. Yes, we can handle that right here. Ishbin smiled. This wasn't unusual. It was common for commoners to arm themselves with swords and armor scavenged from battlefields and aim to become adventurers. Compared to the mundane life of a village, the life of an adventurer, defeating monsters for gold and glory, was a dream profession, and most of them met their end on their very first adventure. First, there's a registration fee of 5 silver coins for the necessary documents. Is that acceptable? No problem. The man fumbled in his clothes and produced a small leather pouch. He reached inside and placed 5 silver coins on the counter. Ishbin picked one up and examined both sides. It was worn, but the official mint mark was still visible. It would do. All right, confirmed. Now, there are a few things I need you to fill out. Would you like me to write for you, or will you fill it out yourself? The scribe fee is 5 copper coins. I'll have you write it, please. The man placed another silver coin on the counter.
This was also common. In a kingdom where the literacy rate was below 50%, only those of a certain class or education could write. Ishbin returned 5 copper coins to the man, then dipped a quill pen into an inkwell and spread out a sheet of parchment. First, could you please tell me the name you'd like to register? Let's see. The man paused, looking up at the ceiling and muttering to himself. It was a strange sight, but Ishbin wasn't particularly bothered. It wasn't rare for people to hide their original names when becoming adventurers. Whatever name they chose, it didn't matter as long as they did their job properly. Of course, she would still have to check for any criminal records or wanted posters. Still, she wished he'd stop talking to himself. It was a little creepy. Eventually, the man seemed to settle on a name he liked and spoke. "All right, please put down Momon."